The Iranian regime shows no sign of yielding either at home or abroad. Despite growing domestic discontent and sustained international pressure, it appears to be becoming more repressive, not less. At home, the authorities are intensifying their crackdown on civil society. Abroad, they are adopting an increasingly defiant posture. Arbitrary arrests, executions, and attacks on civil and cultural activists have reportedly increased as the state faces mounting external pressures. More than 300 people were executed in the past month, and two protesters were publicly executed in Isfahan 2 days ago. The pressure has been particularly severe in Kurdish areas. Two Kurdish cultural and civil society, known as Vesi Brothers activists, were reportedly shot dead by security forces in Kermanshah last month. Last week, another Kurdish activist, Mehdi Tawakkoli, along his family, his sister, and his mother, reportedly killed by the Iranian security forces. The state has also extended this campaign beyond Iran's border. It continues to target the bases of Iranian Kurdish opposition parties in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. What is driving this behavior? What does it tell us about the regime's future? Is the government acting from a position of strength or from a fear of losing control? And why are Kurdistan and Kurdish activists and political organizations regarded as a particular threat during this crisis? I am Roji Mokrian from the MRD to discuss these questions and more, joined by Professor Abbas Vali. Professor Abbas Vali is a political theorist specializing in modern political thought, Middle Eastern politics, and Kurdish politics. He is the author of several books, including The Forgotten Years of Kurdish Nationalism in Iran. Professor Vali, welcome back to the MRD.
Thank you very much, Rojin, and thank you to MRG for organizing this talk and making it possible for me to talk to your readers.
Thank you so much again. We appreciate your time. Let's begin with this question. With the intensification of domestic repression, we see that the Iranian regime shows no sign or change of its suppressive measure when it comes to its own civil society or its own people. And this, at first glance, might tell us that or talks about some sort of contradiction. Why the regime, while facing mounting external pressure, tries to show more repressive measure against its own population? What it tells us about the Iranian, even foreign policy or decision when it comes to its own society?
Thank you. Thank you. We are in a very, what I would say, specific situation in Iran, in particular, and the Middle East, and also, of course, insofar as it is concerned, insofar as the American foreign policy and is concerned. Now, the problem here is that we are in a situation where America and Israel, they have waged a war against Iran. Now, many would say that Iran was the provocateur of the war. I leave that aside. That is a debatable issue. But what we see on the ground is that America and Israel, have waged a war against Iran. And this war, first 12 days and then some 40 days, this war, went on. And we are in a very paradoxical situation in the sense that we have America and Israel, which could be considered as the military winners of the war. But we have Iran, which is definitely militarily has been pounded very badly. And clearly, militarily, it's no match for massive American firepower and American military. But at the same time, Iran has emerged victorious strategically. And this for the main reason that neither America nor Israel have been able to achieve their declared or undeclared objectives of this war. Be it the regime change from Israeli point of view, or destroying Iran's military power and forcing Iran to the negotiation table from a very inferior position, or forcing Iran to abandon its policy, its nuclear program, to end its missile program, and also to abandon supporting financially and militarily its proxy powers in the Middle East. In other words, to end what is called its strategic depth in the region. None of this has been achieved. And what this paradox of military sort of victory of America and a strategic failure, we have here a situation which is really is right in front of us, and this is this, that we see the strategic limits of American hegemony. American hegemony has, in practice, encountered its limitations in the war with Iran. It's a big, massive power, but is unable to dictate, unable to change the situation according to its own objectives or in line with its own objectives. On the other hand, we have Iran. Iran clearly strategically has won this war and is using this strategic advantage, which is now clearly is the control of shipping on the Strait of Hormuz and so on and so forth, is using this strategic advantage in order to push America to its diplomatic limits, really. That is the situation. But Iran also is in a paradoxical situation, and that comes to your question, is that Iran has won this war strategically and is able and has shown that it's able to withstand the American military pressure, Israeli military pressure, and this resistance is being shown every day by expanding the war, by extending the field of operation to the neighboring countries. For instance, yesterday we heard last night that Iran has attacked the American ships in some Egyptian ports. That is, goes as far as Iranian power actually go to, Middle East, North Africa. Let's say the westernmost part of Middle East as such, and North Africa. But the paradox is this: that this victory this strategic victory in foreign relations, and also probably in the battlefield strategic, Iran is unable to translate this to support and and increase or augmentation of its falling legitimacy at home. This has clearly has not been achieved. There is a gap, and this gap is very serious. between Iran's Iran's victories in foreign relationship and its a lack of enthusiasm and support inside the country for the regime. In fact, the reports that we get, and you probably know better than me, that a considerable sector of population are hoping that the regime will fall. There is little doubt about that. And particularly, this is very evident in the so-called peripheral communities, which is Baluchistan, Kurdistan, Khuzestan, and parts of Azerbaijan, and so on and so forth. And also in Tehran, the population are divided, and they part of a small part, are really, there are zealots, supporting the regime, but majority are also hoping that this war would end with the regime change in Iran, or with a situation where the regime will be forced to make massive compromises, so much so that these compromises will change its character, forced, its policy and character. So this gap between the strategic victory of the regime and a lack of enthusiasm and support inside the country for this victory is now this gap is unfortunately is being increasingly filled with violence. A regime, in order, to respond to its own insecurities, internal insecurities, which this strategic victory has not helped. This insecurity, in fact, increased these insecurities, because it always feels the pressure from outside, and clearly regime knows that it is not popular inside, despite this strategic victory, despite the resistance. If the people are quiet, probably it's a mixture of fear or nationalistic sort of feeling, or even, wait and see policy, that what will happen. Now, in this situation, the regime is increasing its violence, and this violence we see in daily executions, in amassing forces on borders, like in Kurdistan, in Baluchistan, and also increasing its repressive forces and repressive, if you like, apparatuses inside the country, expecting uprising, expecting intervention from the civil society. But civil society is in a peculiar situation, in a sense, that I am coming to. It is civil society clearly has a what can be said? It has a high degree of consciousness of the situation. There's no doubt about it. But this consciousness is not directly translated into subjective action. So we have a kind of muted subjectivity, so to speak. And this partly goes back to the massive repression, massive suppression of the January uprisings in Iran. And this suppression clearly forced the civil society in a very defensive position. And soon after that, the 40-day war started. And in my opinion, I think civil society has not recovered yet from the shock of this suppressive strategy of the regime. And this soon followed by the war. and problems caused by the war for the population, problems largely which are concerned with the sphere of, biopolitics, a sphere of daily life, a sphere of management of daily life under serious repression, and also a repression which is being carried out in a situation of a very chronic economic crisis in Iran. So this is why I would say the civil society is conscious of its being, and it's conscious of its political, if you like, being, its political existence as such. But it is not active. It's, it is, the combination of repression followed by a war and massive bombing, destruction, and so on, has forced civil society to silence. And I would say that if the situation changes, and this change is followed by a period of calm, period of no war, because I can't say peace, because it's very different. Period of no war, because we shouldn't expect peace between Iran and America for some time, but we can expect a period of no conflict, no war for some time, without actually being a formal peace there. I think probably this is the most likely outcome, because the United States is forced to have some sort of, or end of conflict. End of conflict is not the same as peace.
Yes,
and
exactly. Yeah.
Yes, so this end of conflict may provide an opportunity for the Iranian civil society to reorganize itself, to bring its, if you like, this consciousness of its being, its own being, in opposition to the state, and activate this opposition in one form or another.
Professor, you touch upon many important topics here, and I want to just go back and one by one basically open them.
Yes.
I completely appreciate your discussion about the civil society, or what you refer to as the muted subjectivity mode of civil society. And I completely agree with how you describe the future relation between the US and Iran, which is a condition of a perpetual war and no war. That's it. I
Yes.
agree, and I call it like that. We are going to enter into a cycle of war and no war. And by this, I think it is like we have periodic airstrike, US against Iran, Iran against Gulf countries, and then follows with a pause or like a suspension of airstrikes, and then again to the same thing. At least we can expect that for the next few years until under Trump presidency. But let's go back to the discussion of civil society. What you described here, the basically strategic victory of the Iranian regime in this confrontation, it appears to me very irrational for a regime that already holds upper hand in front of basically a superpower, not be able to translate this victory into boosting its own domestic legitimacy. In a very normal situation, or if we basically expect kind of rational political behavior, one may argue that in such a condition, regime might learn lesson from its own history, which is the history of 47 years of repressive policies against its society. And in the 40s, in the last 47, the society also showed no sign of retreating from its own demand, and they also determined to resist this regime. So why the regime doesn't use this opportunity now that could basically gain a strategic victory to boost its own legitimacy or reconcile with the society by opening the political space for the civil society? Or do you think that because the regime knows that the civil society is fed up with the regime and the civil society basically is in the opposite pole of the nature of the regime itself? Is it this, or I don't know, or we are facing with a completely irrational regime?
No, it is. I mean, the regime has, and the conduct of the power in Iran, let's say, put it like this. The conduct of power has a particular rationality, of course. And this rationality is grounded, I think, mainly in a kind of what may be called a security calculus, a kind of security calculus, which is fighting in two fronts. And this is, on the one hand, it's America and Israel, and on the other hand, it's the civil society, a civil society which has, risen against it several times, and most probably, most sort of, well, not most, the strongest probably, and most widespread one was last January in that respect. But so this security calculus is a two-phase. On the one hand, it is external relations, America and Israel. On the other hand, it's the civil society and opposition civil society, which a regime has experienced it and it fears it. But let's say this is probably not an extraordinary situation, had it not been because of the peculiarities or specificity of Iranian regime. Now, this is that in a war situation, it's always expected that the state is wary of foreign agents or their supporters of foreign force, the hostile force inside the country. The so-called fifth column and so on and so forth that they always have said. But in Iran, it is not it. It is not just the fact that these are actually agents of America or Israel. It is actually, this is a small part of it, or it's an excuse to nail all sorts of opposition inside the country to the existing power structure. And what is very important here, this it seems to me that this fear of civil society easily enters into the regime's calculations with America and in the war against America and Israel. But it is not so easily entering into the power struggle in the power bloc. This is the crux of the issue, is that if this power struggle actually in the power bloc, which is decisive, in fact, a struggle in Iran, insofar as the fate of negotiations with America or orientation towards Israel, Saudi Arabia, other Gulf states is concerned, this power struggle is decisive. Almost we say that in certain ways you can go further. It is constitutive of regime's policy or even determinant of it in certain ways. But now what is important here is that it seems to me they are so in the power bloc, they are so convinced about their own ability to suppress inside that opposition from civil society hardly ever features in this power struggle. If it had featured, then I think they would have come together unanimously to say that in a situation like this, when we are facing a serious internal threat, we'll have to make, or take steps towards, if you like, a compromise with America, or a situation of ending conflict, let's say, which could be renewed and renewed without peace. But it seems to me the regime and the power struggle inside the regime doesn't really take into account this the threat from below. It doesn't. And the reason for it is that particularly the massive and vehement suppression of a very uh, large scale uprising last January made regime became confident that it has the forces, it has the apparatuses, and it has the technology for suppression. Therefore, it is not really worried about that. And what is important, this regime seems to have completely abandoned any consideration of legitimacy or political legitimation of power at the moment. Resistance against Israel and America, and particularly America, at this particular time, the regime convinces the regime that it has a very large legitimacy, and because it's defending the motherland, because it's not just defending Islam, it's not just defending the regime, but it's defending Iran. And it's in relation to that it is on this particular ground that, for instance, the so-called anti-imperialist forces inside Iran and outside Iran, very easily define this war against between America and Israel on the one side and Iran, as an anti-imperialist war or as a liberationist war and so on and so forth, and move into the camp of government. What is very interesting is that for these people, it's not that these left-wing forces or this, hitherto or democratic forces or so-called democratic forces, it's not that because they, they do not know that this regime lacks legitimacy. It's not that because they do not know that this regime killed about 50,000 people, or reportedly some would say 60, 65,000 people in 48 hours. But they would say that that is not at the moment significant, that the fact that this regime is, insofar as civil society is concerned, it is not a legitimate governing force. That is it. The important thing is that because this regime is resisting imperialism. And this is, the kind of legitimacy that this regime is gaining in this situation of absence of popular legitimacy is the legitimacy it is gaining or is constructed on the basis of a nationalist discourse, which is unfortunately mainly constructed and used by left-wing and democratic forces, the so-called axis of resistance.
Yes, again, I just appreciate that you basically touch upon how the majority of the Iranian civil societies challenge the dualism or the binary between imperialism and anti-imperialism, or perhaps challenging one of the most dominant premises of political realism, which is that saying that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And the Iranian civil society reject that yes, the US and perhaps Israel are the enemy of Iran, but Iran is my enemy, but that doesn't mean that the US and Israel are my friend. And they openly, we see and hear this voice that they're not either with the US Israel side nor with the the Islamic Republic of Iran side. And more obviously and loudly, we see that from the Kurdish political parties. The majority, at least to say, of the Kurdish political parties so far, they haven't taken side in this war, at least openly, at least clearly, at least like in a transparent way that we have evidence of it. We don't have evidence that the Kurdish forces are involved in this war or taken side with US-Israel side. But despite their silence, despite the Kurdish attempt to not escalate in this period with the regime, they've been targeted constantly. Even that we had like a periodic ceasefire between the Iran and US declared, especially on April 8th, still we witnessed that the Iranian regime targeted the Kurdish bases in the Kurdistan region of Iraq with missiles, drones. In the past months, just in the past month, at least 19 Kurdish Peshmerga died in these missile attacks against them. But so far, we hear nothing just like issuing statement by the Kurdish forces. Like the Kurdish forces, they possess armed forces, but they argue that this is for self-defense. And self-defense has its own definition. When you've been attacked, you at least do defend your life or you retaliate to create deterrence. We haven't seen that from the Kurdish forces. So is this silence from the Kurdish forces is a sign of a strategic calculation, or it is a sign of weakness, or it is a sign of lack of deterrence of these Kurdish forces against the regime? And if it is a sign of lack of deterrence against the regime, why then these forces do not openly declare that they have given up their armed forces and they have become a complete and total just political movement that advocates for civil society's right?
Before I answer that, I want to say a few words about the special status of the Kurdish forces. You see, in this situation, and generally in the Iranian political field, in Iranian politics, so to speak, you see, the situation of Kurdish forces, the way that the government on the one hand, that's the Islamic State on the one hand, the regime so-called, on the one hand, and the so-called democratic opposition on the other hand, the way that they look at Kurdish state, that tells us something very important politically and theoretically. That means that, a Kurdishness, so to speak, either you are qualifying it by saying that by ethnicity or by language or whatever, or by that, it is, unlike the other parts of, sort of other, members of Iranian community, so to speak, Iranian society, so to speak. The citizenship, the formal citizenship of the state is not enough to qualify them as Iranian. You see, this is something. The opposition and the state expect more from something more from them to be considered as Iranian. And the opposition wants them to, despite the fact that all Kurdish forces, all of them, except probably one, all of them accept in their, program and in their discourse and even in their practice, they do, confess or testify to the fact that their, acceptance of Iranian sovereignty, that doesn't seem to be enough. They want them to swear loyalty to the territorial integrity of Iran. So Kurds in that respect, probably Baluchis would the same if they had similar level of resistance to the state. Probably the Arabs would have been the same if they had the similar level of resistance, and struggle against it. But Kurds at present in that situation. So Kurdish forces really are in a difficult situation, in a sense that, they want to prove, they want to say that, look, why we have to be treated differently if we are also, in terms of informal terms, we are also citizens of this state. But if we are not, then what are you worried about? What are you why we should have the same consideration as you have regarding the Iranian state, or so-called collaboration with foreigner, or moving into Iran with armed forces and so on and so forth. You already have disqualified me as somebody which as your community, as a member of your political community, despite the fact that I am actually living in that geography, despite the fact that I have the same national card or birth card or whatever, despite that. But this doesn't qualify. So Iranian forces in that respect, I think, no matter what they do at the moment, particularly after the very, very, if you like, miscalculated and misconceived comments made by Trump about their significant status in a would-be plan to overthrow regime and so on and so forth, and Israel and Mossad and all that, the story that and this has the Kurdish forces have that. So therefore, I think this is a very difficult task. It's an uphill thing for them to climb, to say that, hey, we are legitimate Iranian forces. We actually haven't, collaborated with Americans, with Israelis, and take us as Iranians. Because they, after all, say that, no, you are Kurds, and you have to prove that you are Iranians, and simply that you are an Iranian citizen. That doesn't make you an Iranian. That leaves Kurds in a limbo, in a very dangerous situation, really. And for that, I sympathize with Kurdish forces. That it's a difficult situation to deal with. With the regime, it is easy, you see. But with the opposition, which claims to be against the regime, it's very difficult to say that I can be like you, on the same line, the same front like you, without going through a special examination, special qualification that you want me to go. So therefore, I think Kurdish forces have to abandon any kind of a moral consideration or moral qualification to be used for judging or assessing the present situation, whether it is morally right or wrong to be in the war. I think what is important, it has to be a hard-nosed, very, if you like, realistic, even harsh, realistic, assessment of the situation as to which side they should take. And the war, I mean, we all know, if we take a moralistic situation, moralistic status or position, if we take moralistic position, no doubt it's very, very easy to condemn any war. And it is very, very difficult to join any war if you take that, or condemn or condone. Both of them would be very difficult on moralistic ground, unless you say this is a war of not, I wouldn't say liberation, but or whatever, some sort of extra, qualification for that. So I think here what is important is that condemning the war is easy, but condemning the war on the basis of absolute criteria is a fatal mistake. I condemn the war in this situation, and largely because I don't go to say that I'm going to condemn this war, whatever the consequences. That's, I think, a very wrong policy. I condemn this war at present in this situation without being aware of what the outcomes are going to bring about. Because this war may indeed bring about outcomes which even majority of the so-called democratic Iranian opposition may welcome it, which is, of course, the collapse of the regime or a huge uprising to bring the regime down. We can't anticipate that. We can't, calculate for that. Therefore, I think a qualified a qualified opposition to war at present, it's a good policy, but I think a kind of an opposition to war on absolute grounds, it is a serious mistake. Not only just for the Kurds, I think for entire opposition, but particularly for the Kurds. And in that respect, I mean, when I leave it in a sense in a relative position to the changes in the political field, I want to say that I want to have, as Kurdish political forces, an open hand to deal with the situation in a particular, condition, in particular situations that the outcome that I am dealing with is not just in relation to the regime and the possibility of its collapse or whatever possibility that the war is going to bring about in relation to the regime. But also there are possibilities that this war is going to bring about in relation to the non-Kurdish opposition, because that is also unclear. Yes. And we must calculate, Kurdish political forces must calculate for that. Because without that calculation, the possibility of any kind of alliance in tomorrow when we know more about the outcome of this war, would be very difficult. And therefore, I would say that if the Kurdish forces are taking anti-war position, it has to be relative to the changes that might happen in its situation. Absolutely refuse and reject any absolute moral or political criteria for opposing the war. They should not tie their own hand. As I said, because of particular situation of Kurdish forces, that they don't automatically qualify as Iranian citizenship. That means that when outcome becomes clear, they have to calculate not only in relation what is going to become of the regime, but what is going to become of non-Kurdish opposition too.
Professor, the picture that you here portrayed for us is talking very clearly about the Iranian political affair, and especially when it comes to the oppositional groups. And that's that expectation from center toward the periphery, which is, I think it is the dominant perspective since the minor tyranny, which like they expected the periphery to march to Tehran after the collapse of the 1906 constitutional revolution. They expected the periphery to march there, sacrifice their lives, take back the parliament and hand it to the center, and the periphery to return back to their home. And the expectation remains with the centers there. Still, they expect the Kurdish people right now to do whatever they can to even like go in and engage with the armed conflict with the IRGC forces to take back Tehran even for the center. But then when it comes to the future of the Iran, the institutional design of post-Islamic Republic of Iran, they say that's not now time for talking about this. We're going to decide, the center is going to decide later. And this brings me back to the question of all the obstacles that the Iranian civil society faces. You refer to the suppression that the civil society faces comes from the Iranian regime. And of course, I agree with your description of war or anti-war condemnation or campaign. I agree with this also.
Yeah.
But there is another question. One also, I think, from my point of view, is that the civil society also lacks organization and coherence. And one determining factor for this lack of cohesion or lack of organization is the lack of opposition. And
Yes.
what so far led to this lack of a coherent opposition is the national cohesion in Iran, predominantly the Kurdish question.
Yes, exactly. You see, when we talk about political cohesion, of course, this cohesion maybe, has an internal side, which, will be from inside the Iranian civil society, right? But there is also an external side to cohesion. That is that in relation to an existing external situation whereby the cohesive factors inside civil society are defining their own position in relation to, and that is the existence of a strong opposition with a powerful, absorbing, sort of directing, convincing sort of discourse, unified or otherwise, but a kind of providing a kind of point of reference for forces inside to, the cohesive forces inside civil society. That is lacking, clearly. That is lacking. And what we should expect, I think the best option would be that, to expect some sort of a force which will bring about this kind of cohesion with or without organization from inside that civil society. I think that also can bring about a most attractive option for the Kurdish forces to calculate in their, thing. I'm not, knowing with the so-called democratic forces, non-Kurdish democratic forces outside the country. I don't base much hope on them, for the Kurds for alliance with the Kurds and so on. Inside situation may be different, but Kurds have to, in a sense, be prepared for that. When I said that the criteria for condemning and condoning the war should be relative, some might say that I'm taking an opportunistic position. But I don't call it an opportunism, although opportunism is always part of politics. But I'm not talking, I am talking about taking a very realistic stance on that. Realistic stance on the basis of constant assessment and calculation of the situation. And I say constant and constant. In this respect, I hope the Kurdish forces wake up. This is, and they realize that they are facing a situation that really has direct consequences, not just implications, but direct consequences, for existential, sort of consequences. They have to, because change of strategy for them in a situation that they are in is a really existential question in large part, because they are armed forces. They have followed the strategy of armed resistance against the regime. And if we agree that the situation has nationally, that is inside, countrywide in Iran, and also regionally and internationally has changed, then I think they have to rush, think about, rush thinking about a change, a kind of strategic change. This is very, very important. Now, that strategic change doesn't mean that I don't think that they should at the moment really abandon arms. I don't, but, giving up this strategy of armed struggle does not mean that they should abandon arms. Arms for them at the moment is important. And but they have to very much shift the focus of their attention and their activity from outside to inside of Kurdish civil society on the one hand, and on the other hand, building links between the institutions that they ought to build inside Kurdish civil society with institutions and similar forces in the wider, society in Iran. Because those, if you like, participatory networks that in society must be created, those participatory networks, are very important to cross the existing boundaries, either created by the regime or by the opposition, to cross them and link up with similar forces, democratic forces, genuine democratic forces inside Iranian society at large. So this is really the strategy, a change. I think changing from armed strategy to armed resistance to civil resistance or civil struggle doesn't mean abandoning everything. It means that the focus of activity and the means and technologies are necessary to push them forward must change. And for this, I think Kurdish forces really do need at the moment the direct help of this word. I am using it, this term, I'm using it cautiously. Don't want to be sort of criticized for using it unreservedly, but I think they should directly link up or incorporate what is called the Kurdish intelligentsia inside the Kurdish intelligentsia. And also in relation to that, I don't think really Kurdish political forces can make a big headway or without direct participation of Kurdish feminist forces. And they have to open up for, if we say that Kurdish intelligentsia, socialist, democratic, and nationalist intelligentsia inside, and by intelligentsia I mean, I'm not saying intellectuals. I'm saying people who, are politically minded. So it's, we may have a very important intellectual, artist or what have you, but totally oblivious to the political situation. So in this relationship, I think we need that largely democratic. I'm using this democratic intelligentsia, be it nationalist, socialist, Marxist, or what have you, inside this, and also feminist forces, much needed, forces concerned with the ecology and so on. So what I am saying that for this struggle, we need a very broad-based thing. And for that, Kurdish forces must open up, must accept the reality, must open up, and must talk to people outside their organization constructively.
Professor Abbaswali, we appreciate your thought and time. We have to leave it here, but if you don't have any more, like if there's
I don't. I'm very glad we had I hope we had a nice discussion, good discussion.
We appreciate again, and I hope
Thank you.
In the near future again to have you and to continue the discussion again.
That would be my pleasure.
Yeah,
thank you
so much. Thank you.